Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Paranormal Karen. I don't know if I have any announcements for you. I think we're right in the middle of the apocalypse. I think it's December. I hope you all are well. I have a wonderful show for you today. Returning a guest I had on, as you all know about my fairy obsession, Dr. Richard Sugg. I am so happy to talk to you again, Richard. How are you doing over there in England?
Yeah, well, thank you. Eve of Halloween, and it's suitably dark, and pagan.
And I love your. I think I told you last time. I heard you on Coast to Coast AM, and then I looked up your book, and I already owned it. And you have so many books, fascinating. I'm sure my listeners, mummies, cannibals, and vampires. The Smoke of the Soul that we're going to talk about today. Real vampires, of course. My one on fairies that you have. So many books here. Are you actually a doctor of literature?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I did my PhD in literature, but it was already coming into the area of what is now called cultural history, which I find the most interesting kind of strand of history. So I tend to get labeled a historian now, and I'm quite comfortable with that. But I like to kind of fuse the two as far as possible. And I think literature often gives you all the human life, all the psychology, all the unstated stuff as well. So it's important to history. Just getting a drink.
That's okay. Yeah, hang on. Also, it is very interesting how I actually read for a guy that's a writer, and he just started writing, and all his stuff is like sort of what's going on with him right now, but it's happening in other characters. And when I spoke to you earlier, we got on the topic of Qanon, which I was very surprised. But tell me how that is coming up in what you're doing now.
Yeah, so it was about 10 odd years ago, I was lecturing in English at the University of Durham, and I was lecturing on Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, which is big play of his, still performed, of course. And it happened to coincide with Sarah Palin, if you remember, getting into a row about a silly advert which had somebody in the crosshairs, and there was a row about, threatening somebody's life. And she then blurted out to the press that she'd been the victim of a blood libel. She seemed to be under the impression that a blood libel was anything where you were accused of threatening somebody's life. It was pretty evident she didn't know what the phrase meant. So I researched up on this and was pretty shocked by what I found. And I expect your readers, your listeners will be too in a moment. And the students didn't seem to know much about this. They were very interested and attentive. But it struck me that with a play like The Merchant of Venice, which I've got to say, as wonderful as I think Shakespeare is, I really think it's a deeply anti-Semitic play, and is scarcely recoverable, unfortunately. So, yeah, you'll see in a moment where I believe that, with Shylock going after Antonio's heart, as it were, wanting to cut the heart out of him. This has got an awful resonance with centuries of atrocious and murderous, absolutely preposterous allegations against Jews by Christians, over 800 years of them. So I've been looking in recent months deeper into this subject. Astonishing book, if anyone wants to look at it, called Unholy War by Jewish historian David Kurtzer. And I'll be quoting from that to some extent. But the blood libel, for people who haven't come across it, and I'm not surprised if they haven't, is what lies behind one big element of Qanon, this insane notion that this elite, this various elite, but of course a lot of these people who've been targeted in this, George Soros, the Rothschilds, Mark Zuckerberg, are Jewish, and they are powerful people. So the idea that they're preying on children, and we've got a modern version of preying on innocence, the modern version being, of course, paedophilia. It's quite a recent stereotype. Obviously, it does actually occur as well. And the older version was this, that the Jews around Passover every year ritually needed to murder Christian children and either drink their blood or bake it into special ritual bread or cakes. So we have insane number of stories about Jews kidnapping these young children, crucifying them sometimes. It was important they died in maximum agony, according to the mad myths, hanging them upside down to drain their blood, and so on. It goes back to England in, I think it's 1144, the first accusation, 12th century. And there's a particularly pivotal accusation in 1255 in northeast England, Lincolnshire. So a boy called Little Hugh of Lincoln is the short way to remember this. The boy was found dead in a well. The odds were that children were allowed to do what they like, and he simply fell down the well. It's a tragic death, but probably purely accidental. There were a large number of Jews in Lincoln to celebrate a wedding at the time. And before you knew it, Henry III, the king, and the Bishop of Lincoln were putting their heavy weight behind these accusations that Jews had kidnapped the boy and murdered him. And Jews were executed in London after what you might call a show trial, I suppose. No less damaging than this, really, is the way that this stood as an icon for these insane Christian prejudices for centuries to come, and well down into the 20th century. And as I found looking at QAnon, they persist on Christian websites to this hour. People will repeat stories like this, another one being Simon of Trent in Italy. And yeah, they're repeated as straightforward fact. One of the guides at Lincoln Cathedral was believed to was heard to be repeating the story as though it was fact around 2000 AD. In 1925, a school was set up, a private school in Lincolnshire, and it was named St. Hugh's School. Now, the school claims that it is named after both a French saint, Hugh, Bishop of Lincoln at one point, and the little boy. This seems to be very unlikely. You don't name something after two different people.
Right.
And what's even more of a clincher here is, wait for this, but you can look up the school's website to this day. Until very recently, early this year, the logo, and this includes the badge on the blazers of very young children. If you look at their website, they're very keen to look like a representative school, multicultural, and the rest of it. And these poor little children wearing on their blazer until recently a badge, which has this icon. It's a ball hovering over a brick wall. Now, this goes back to ballad versions, which were a very important form of transmission, songs, a time when people didn't read always, about Little Hugh. And one of the versions had it that the boy was playing with his ball, gives a lot of colour, which makes it more, I think, memorable, knocks the ball over the wall of a garden. And what you know, of course, this was a Jewish garden. They lured him in, and that was the end of Little Hugh, in the form of Jewish ritual murder, allegedly. So this was the school's logo, a ball going over a wall. It was protested against only early this year by, I think it was a Jewish Chronicle. They agreed to take the ball off, but the brick wall is still there.
Wow.
So not only that, but the school is still named after this incredible libel. And this, to me, brought out the fact that there is interesting parallel with the whole very powerful set of protests from Black Lives Matter and related groups, where just down the train line from me in Bristol, I live in Cardiff, we had the iconic scenes of the statue of Colston, the black slavery era slaver, being pulled into the river. And this did the job. You didn't ask politely, you didn't sign petitions. You said, right, this has got to go, and no one's going to say, right, we're going to put it back. So, yeah, you've not only got this school full of little impressionable children, but you've got in Austria, for example, a church which was built in 1670 solely in southern Austria to commemorate a fabricated blood libel about a little boy murdered supposedly in 1462. And the story had it that he was murdered on a stone. This stone became known as the Judenstein. The alleged same stone, Jews' stone, was used as a kind of centerpiece of the church. Now, this church was built solely to commemorate this madness in the form of the accusation, and it was a place of pilgrimage until the 1990s. I wrote to them a little while ago to say, could they clarify the status of the church? And I had no answer. So we've got this. Tony Kamins, historian, has said that anti-Jewish sculptures, bas reliefs, paintings are hiding in plain sight all across Europe. You go into Notre Dame and you pass between two figures, and it's a radically anti-Jewish stereotype. You can see astonishing images of Jews being suckled by pigs in Europe in Christian contexts. Stained glass window was commissioned for, I think it was Nuremberg Town Hall in, I believe, the 17th century, which has a Jew and a witch murdering a child. And a stained glass window is something particularly kind of repellent and disturbing about this mingling of high art and beauty and this, insane hatred. Now, just to give you a little bit more detail, this is a very long story. I won't take it too much farther. I think people are getting the idea, but how mobile this myth is, the version of it that we've got now is children being preyed on, but it's quite precise, the idea that children's blood is being taken to make a particular drug. Probably
adrenoquin, something like that.
That's right, isn't it? And is it? I think it's an elixir of youth, probably. I imagine.
Yeah.
So you've got
the Hollywood movie stars stay young looking. It's not about plastic surgery. It's about.
So it's. Right. Yeah, it's aged power preying on innocent youth. So it's got very powerful kind of motifs in it. Well, the blood we've heard a lot about, and it's been very precisely insisted over and over again. I've got to explain that this was insisted by Catholic newspapers, plain sight, all across Europe, France, Italy, with the Vatican conniving most of the time. The Pope's actually conniving in this to the dawn of the Holocaust, basically, right through the 19th century, right into the period up to the Second World War, and earlier than that when Jews were being persecuted. And if we conjure up visions of Jewish people herded into ghettos wearing yellow badges, we think the Nazis, we think the Holocaust, the 30s, the 40s. This was invented by the Catholic Church. Both of those things were purely Catholic inventions. So blood, innocence, motifs of conspiracy and secret sex, secret elites. Here's one for you. This goes way, way back, and be assured this didn't actually happen, but the initiate into the secret sect is given a parcel of dough, and he is told to stab the dough with a dagger. He stabs it and realizes only too late when he hears a cry and blood spurts out upon him that there's a baby in the dough. So the initiate and his accomplices drink up the blood greedily. They then fall together in incestuous orgies. And the detail of this is wonderful, because not only do they fall together in incestuous orgies, but they need to be in the dark to slightly dampen down their shame about who they might be enjoying. So they have a dog. The dog is tied to a lamp. And the lamp is the only source of light. And suddenly someone says, "Here, Rover, nice juicy bone." And Rover bolts for the bone, pulls the lamp over, and in darkness they all fall together, mother and son, father and daughter, sister and brother, you name it. Now, this blood libel, as it obviously is, with a nice bit of juicy incest thrown in, is targeting the early Christians of Rome. You'd call it poetic justice if it was the other way around chronologically, but this shows you how kind of peculiarly enduring, because it kicks off in 63 AD, and peculiarly kind of mobile it is. You can see, I suppose, to some extent, that if your new Christian sect starts saying we drink the blood of our God, they're going to encourage this. But here's the irony, the religion that says we drink blood every Sunday and it's the holiest thing you can do is Christianity, is Catholicism. So there's a lot of projected unease and guilt going on here, probably. Wow. But yes, just to round this off, because it is important, I think, to understand how persistent and unapologetic this is. When the Catholic Church was hitting the problems of sexual abuse allegations, in 2010, Italian Bishop Giacomo Babini countered these accusations of clerical sex abuse by saying that they were a result of a covert Zionist attack. And speaking to a Catholic website, Pontifex, this very senior figure, who's 81, was quoted as saying about the Jews, "They do not want the church. They are its natural enemies. Deep down, historically speaking, the Jews are God killers." I could multiply examples, but I think just one particularly disturbing one is an Italian painter, Giovanni Gaspero. And if you look up Giovanni Gaspero, it's pretty much as it sounds, on Facebook, you will find a version of a painting he made, I think, months ago, showing, I quote, a group of hook-nosed Jews with pale and yellow uneven teeth strangling the child. This will be Simon of Trent, very big one, which resulted in the burning to death of various Jews accused of his murder, and draining his blood. Now, after a not surprising controversy over this, just months ago, this was censored. And so if you go to Gasparo's Facebook page, the painting is partially there with a block over it, shouting censored very indignantly. So, yeah.
Wow. And nothing is new, is it?
It's not new, and what's depressing is just how extraordinarily persistent it is. I mean, I'll just give one more example because it's so breathtaking that I think people need to know it. If anybody's, wavering about beginning to believe this madness, they probably ought to know that in Poland, in a place called Kielce, a little boy went missing for, I think, a couple of days. He'd apparently been staying with his friends, and he told his father that there was a bunch of children kidnapped, in wait for this will ring bells, I think, in a cellar of a certain house in the city of Kielce. And to cut a long story short, you had a gun battle directed at this Jewish house. No children were found, of course, in the cellar, but this pogrom spread out to other areas of the city once workers came out of one of the factories. Up to 1,000 steel mill workers burst forth, and about 20 Jews were battered to death. People being taken to hospital wounded, men, women, and children, were attacked on the way to the hospital. A 3-week-old baby was murdered. People were murdered for months afterwards when Jews were hunted off trains with the connivance of railway staff. Wow. And this beautiful little incident occurred in 1946.
Wow. It's amazing how we think we've either become more civilized or I always say that 1946, my God. It's like when we go into pardon the helicopters going over my apartment, if you can hear that.
Sure.
When we go into these horrible, insane asylums, when we're investigating, they have the most pulling everyone's teeth out without anesthesia, all these other things, and it closed in 1986. And you go, 86? What the hell?
Yeah.
That 1946, that's amazing. God, and it really is shocking. And I don't know what it is about human nature that, I'm watching them interview these people on MSNBC and they're crying about the children that have been murdered. And it's like, I'm speechless because it's so, it's amazing through the years. I wonder if it was psychologically QAnon knew to go to this area, or if it was very well planned.
Oh, it's so hard to work it out, isn't it? I think the answer to the reason why the Jews were targeted originally by Christians is that in the end, and I'll come to this talking about the smoke of the soul, the Christians know, the more educated ones know, that they stole the Jews' religion. And that religion is not big enough for the two of them. You come up with this story about the Old Testament being a prefiguring of the New Testament. And if I pick up a Bible and thumb my way to the start of the New Testament, it looks like nothing. It's, 100 pages compared to 500 pages of the Old Testament. So if they're going to give that up and admit where they got their religion from, and the small detail, which a surprising number of people don't seem to know, that Christ was Jewish, and even if the Jews had been responsible for his death, which they weren't, it would really be up to them, wouldn't it? And not only that, he wasn't interested in a universal religion, not remotely. He was interested in a Jewish religion, and Christianity was the result of St. Paul's very zealous efforts in evangelism. So I think that's where it comes down to in the end. And if you look at how visceral this is, the idea of Shylock, going for Antonio's heart, there's that insane kind of recoding of the idea that they will tear the heart out of our religion. Well, no, you transplanted a bloody heart from their own Bible, and it's your damn fault if it comes back to haunt you, I'm afraid, as it did in Questions of the Soul, because they come up with this very peculiar hybrid of how the soul existed in the body. But now in QAnon, to get back to that, I wonder, when you talk about these people weeping, people do like being part of a rather strange weeping community. And here in Britain, as you probably know, in 97, it was the whole business of Princess Diana, which generated its own conspiracy theories about her being murdered by, I don't know, the rest of the Crown, secret services, you name it. And it was an extraordinary burst of hysteria, which I think you never would have guessed at these kind of suppressed emotions if the woman had not died. And do people like being part of this kind of bonded community? And in a time of crisis, as we are now, various crises kind of converging, do they like feeling they've got some kind of odd sense of control, even if it's only psychological control, that they know the buried dark truth? But in the end, I'll be honest, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Hey, hold on, everybody. We're going to be right back in 1 second. Hang on. Hey, everybody, let me tell you about my friend Elaine Hathaway. She's not just an incredible tarot reader. I know because I had a reading. She also does curse breaking, healing and prosperity magic, and the removal of dark entities. I had a client that was constantly being bothered by a dark entity. I sent her to Elaine, and man, she cleared that situation up right away. It was so impressive. She does so many things. Please check out her website at therisingmoon.com. There you can click on her YouTube channel and take a look at her, because you're going to feel like curse breaking and the removal of dark entities. This is a little old woman sitting in the corner of the room with a hood and a cape. No, she is the loveliest person. She does so many things other than tarot. Please check out her website at therisingmoon.com. You can also hear her October 23rd on this show at therisingmoon.com. All your paranormal and metaphysical needs will be met there. It really is. I guess it's the psychology. I don't know if I want to say the psychology of cults or, but it is very funny that you, when you're saying people forget Jesus was Jewish. Like that's exactly right. And you know what? I work in Utah a lot, and it's very Mormon. And I will tell you, the pictures of Jesus, he gets whiter and blonder every time I go back. Like there's no Middle Eastern Jesus there anymore.
No, he's very, in the Victorian paintings. Similarly, he's very pale and very slender for a carpenter's son, isn't he?
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. And you're all research and fact based, but I'm all woo woo. And I remember watching this one woman and I found her very credible. And she said she talked to angels, or, she had her thing. And she said she was often visited by Jesus. And the first thing she said was that Jesus said I wasn't on a cross, and and I was a rabbi, and I had a wife. And it's the story that you go, well, that makes more sense.
Wow.
But I always thought it was funny because she said one thing about Jesus is he always travels with Buddha because Buddha's funny. And that was my favorite.
Well, that's my kind of Jesus. I mean, Buddha, I've got some time for,
Exactly. Just having some laughs. God, that's amazing. It's even fascinating to me, to the point where Sarah Palin didn't even know the term she was using.
No, certainly not. And I think a lot of people didn't. And there was debate between Alan Dershowitz and I'm trying to think who else at the time about it being now a free-floating term, and it sort of floated loose of its original context, which, you can pull that argument in some context, but this is too important and too appalling to deny its historical roots, especially when they're still going now, not just 60 years ago.
Right. And Pizzagate, where somebody went over to the pizza place with the guns here because they thought Hillary Clinton was in the cellar. I don't know, because, I will admit I have a paranormal podcast. There are certain conspiracies that I believe, but they have all gotten washed down. Like, I just think the 5G Wi-Fi towers are awful. I think that's an awful lot of EMF. They have to be 3 to 5 houses apart. And then,
Absolutely. No, you're right. Yeah.
yeah. And then someone else throws in Bill Gates and vaccination and the whole thing. So then the whole thing gets thrown out. You're crazy, instead of just going, just look at this one thing. But I will tell you, they said when the COVID hit and people were sitting in front of their computers, QAnon's following went up 700%. And I really feel like, again, these people that want to be part of something, the poor children, the victims, somebody's a victim, it just is crazy. Plus, I don't know this part of it, but I bet they're thinking they're all white children. I'm sure that fits in there somewhere.
Good point. I expect they are, yeah, and Christian probably as well. It's
Now,
breathtaking stuff. Yeah.
Not to get off topic, but have you seen the Borat movie?
No, I did see the first one. I haven't had a chance to watch the second one yet. I keep seeing the ads everywhere.
It's really quite funny. He's really funny. But it's the first time, too, he has sort of spoken as himself. And he made some sort of speech somewhere about what he was doing. It was just so, if you can find it on Facebook, it's really worth watching. It really made me just love him. Like, he's there. He's on,
Very interesting character. Yeah.
He because obviously they don't know he's Jewish. They can't figure out that he's Jewish. And he goes into a synagogue and he says he's dressed like a Jew. And it's the most cartoonish, mocking. I don't know. Just, it was a really great movie. But after I saw him speak, I was like, I really appreciate what he's doing.
I think in the first film, sorry to interrupt, but I think in the first film, I remember it, he has a running of the Jews, which is a sort of, jolly carnival thing where they pelt the Jews with all sorts of stuff while they run through a crowd. And of course, this is based on reality, is the uncomic truth.
Yes. He has a scene. It's like almost, so it must be, I figure he's half actors or half real people. It can't be all. He walks into a synagogue with a fake nose and holding a puppet that says media. And in the other hand, he's got a bag of money. And he goes, I'm going to go in and see the Jews. It was like every stereotype dressed up. And it was just so ridiculous. And I mean, I'm sure that part was acted out with the nice ladies that he talked to in there. But it's almost funny how, you kind of have to spell it out like that to people.
You have to push people to the edge to make them realize how ridiculous, these things are getting, I guess. If they were only ridiculous, it wouldn't be so bad. But if they're deadly as well,
yeah. So, and you know what else? What interesting connection you made there? I never even thought of that. The body of Christ, or the blood of Christ, as in, that, because you know what fascinates me about vampires, and then I want to get to the smoke of the soul. They seem to be the one thing of all the paranormal things that I study. You have historically gone back to what vampires, and in the last podcast I did with you, talking about how we romanticize them and what they were sort of perceived to be. But they are really the only of all the paranormal, metaphysical. I go back, I can find fae, I can't quite find vampires unless they're shapeshifters or jinn, but they seem like the only thing that's kind of a human, am I making sense? It's like a human, we made that up. Does that make sense?
Human construction. Yeah. I mean, just quickly, they're kind of a human construction and a reality insofar as some actual cases where, if someone dies a violent death, a suicide, an accident, a murder, they're likely to come back as a vampire. Well, it took me a long time to get my head around it, but if somebody dies in that way, they're very likely to come back as a ghost. So what they were talking about would be, from our point of view, ghosts, geists perhaps. They often talk about directly as a poltergeist. But as a construction, you're absolutely right. So the two interesting construction victims, scapegoat victims in the past, and not that long ago always, were the witch and the vampire. So surprising number of things: contagious disease, death, unexplained deaths, deaths of the young, problems with your agriculture, your chickens, your cattle, problems with rain, too much of, droughts, not enough of, blamed on vampires or witches. And you've got a situation here where the vampire, with unwitting chivalry, perhaps saved the lives of many innocent women who in other cultures were attacked as and murdered as witches. And of course, after it became illegal to actually prosecute supposed witches, they were attacked and murdered in appalling numbers into the 20th century. So, yeah, you're right. It's very much a construction in some ways, but there is a germ of underlying supernatural reality to it as well.
Yeah, that's humans are just great. Okay, so tell me about Smoke of the Soul, this book. Fascinating.
Yeah. So this was something that I had the hunch for way back during my PhD thesis in 1997 through to 2001. And I kept thinking about it for a long time and finally published the first version of the book in 2011. It was well received, but I'm afraid it was imprisoned in the stout hardbacked covers of an academic imprint, no paperback, and so was costing about £100. And rather frustrated at this situation, I got the rights back from the publisher presently and produced a new version. I managed to get it down to about £11. The cover was better, and the book I rewrote in quite an interesting, radical way, I think you'll find, as I'll explain toward the end of this discussion. But yeah, I was fascinated by, most basically, if you want me to sort of encapsulate it in a fist-sized chunk, if you like, it was this, that we think of the soul as the irrational, emotive part of the body, the thing that is opposed to the body. You think of body and then you think of soul, and they're radically separate, different, opposed. Well, this was not the case. If we cut now back to the beginning of the story, in 1540, the landmark anatomist, as he would become, Andreas Vesalius, creator of modern anatomy, was performing his first public dissection in Bologna in Italy, in a church, candlelit, not very suitable for the minutiae to be viewed from a distance. And the carnival was going on outside. To make the matter less sober than it might be, the carnival was going on inside to some extent, with probably people wearing carnival masks and garb, and also getting very, very rowdy. Why were they getting rowdy? Well, it seemed to be when Vesalius started trying to dissect the head of the corpse. He at one point said, "I'm going to do the head again tomorrow, but if you get like this you did yesterday, I'm not going to do it. So you better behave yourselves." To kind of paraphrase bluntly, there was a banging on the pews, shouting, "Show us the soul." And this takes us to two possible locations for the seat of the soul. If we think vampires again, the head, the heart, you would find these deviant burials where you've got rocks on the head, rocks on the heart. And this goes back, way back, and was very much a live issue in the 16th century here. So that people argued about the heart, they argued about the head, but the organ of the soul was allegedly at the base of the brain, and you can see it on the back of the book. I've reproduced it there. It was allegedly a net of veins and arteries which were woven together in this extraordinary fashion. We'd kind of think maybe a strip, if you like, where you couldn't work out how somebody could have entangled everything so beautifully. So it had the kind of thumbprint of God on it in that sense, but it also seemed like a kind of alchemical apparatus in the body, which was sufficiently amazing to distill, I suppose, the raw material of the blood and the hottest spirits of the blood into the final numinous steam, as it were, of the soul in the brain. And there was a lot of argument about the brain and the heart. What's interesting here is that the brain was not really invented until the end of the period I cover in the book. A character called Thomas Willis was the father of neuroscience in the Restoration. Beautiful illustrations of the brain in his books drawn by Christopher Wren, the architect. And they knew very little, thought very little, cared very little to some extent about the brain. So that you would have, Christians talking about the heart. You must feel your religion in your heart. Your heart has depth. Your heart has feeling. Your heart moves. And I started to think about this in ways which seem obvious when you do, but actually we kind of feel it without thinking about it. I don't know about you. I mean, do you feel you're in your brain or your heart, if where you are in your body?
I feel like my brain, and it's funny because I'm an overthinker and I'm always trying to pull that down into my heart, like the feeling part. But if I had to pick, I would say brain.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would, but it struck me that if I close my eyes, I don't quite heavily feel so brain-centered. And I think the eyes play a big part in this. Sure enough, the brain does think. But in the Renaissance, for Christians, it was the heart that thought. They quite seriously said that the heart thought. The main reason for saying this, apart from the fact that I think their thought was quite feeling-based, was that it said so in the Bible. And if you go to the Bible, you've got the heart referred to 826 times, the brain not once. If you get into the late 17th century and you run searches on pretty long, heavyweight databases for hearty and brainy, you get plenty of references to hearty. You get only 6 to brainy, and quite a few of them are insults. It was once an insult to be brainy. This opposition is quite complicated in early modern terms. But broadly, what you've got is a sort of rule of 3. The soul in the body starts off in the liver. You eat your food is transformed into blood in your liver. And the spirits, I'll explain these in a moment, but the spirits, kind of vapor of blood, rise up from the liver to the heart and then to the brain, whereas we heard they're processed through this kind of alchemical complex of veins and arteries into the final form of the soul. No one ever seemed to really agree. Was it in the soul? Was it in the brain? Did it move between the two? But in some senses, this didn't matter, because for early modern religion, but also physiology, you couldn't do without a soul that fired, that steamed, that darted throughout the whole of the body. So these spirits, which we barely even think about now, we talk about being low-spirited, your spirits are down very loosely, but this was very, very exact. Francis Bacon, the father of modern science, talks about spirits at great length, and he says, when you see a bruise, so you've got it sort of black, purple, yellow as it changes colour, he said, this is the spirits of the blood clustered into the skin. It's not the blood, it's the spirits. Now, how real, how dangerous, how important were these spirits? You couldn't explain physiology and unity of the body and soul without them, the body and brain as well. They did some very interesting things. Witches, for example, could fascinate you, could bewitch you, could kill you through the eyes. Spirits were darted out through the eyes, particularly into the eyes of children. We've got this motif again, who were more vulnerable for various reasons. The spirits would join their spirits. Because the spirits circulate throughout all the veins and arteries, they would then go down to their heart, bang, boom, you're dead. Plague was a problem for that period as it is for us. And people now seem to be talking about not just covering your nose, covering your mouth. They're talking about the eyes, actually, in some cases, as a site of danger, whether kind of giving or receiving. And in a wonderful novel published recently, To Calais in Ordinary Time, set in plague time, the medieval plague, you have a corpse which has died of plague. The first thing you do is bind up its eyes. It's still dangerous when it's only slightly dead, and it's like spirits leaving the eyes. You catch plague through the eyes. My favourite, I think, in terms of the strange kind of ironies and physiological realities of the spirits, was this. Dr. Faustus, the play, seminal drama where the protagonist sells his soul and is damned for it. Of course, he signs this contract in blood. And in the pivotal scene, Mephistopheles He's very keen to get his signature and take the document away, and that's it, and so on. Well, as you might remember, the blood starts to dry up. They've got a little vessel of it, I suppose, and it starts to coagulate, and he can't finish the contract or the signature. So Mephistopheles comes back with a chafer of coals, sticks this heat underneath the blood, and the blood steams away quite happily. Now, when blood was steaming in the early modern period, so you cut your finger on a cold day, nobody saw steam. They saw spirits. That's what Shakespeare would have seen, it's what Milton would have seen, it's what Marlowe would have seen. And so you've got something very terrifying here. Here's these spirits of the soul steaming into the possibly cold theatre air. You've then got Faustus managing to complete his contract. But why did the blood coagulate? Is he in control of his own soul, or is his soul in control of him, is the kind of question hovering through the audience here. And yeah, the answer seems to be that he's trying to sign away his soul with his soul, and his soul tries to stop him. Interestingly, he doesn't succeed because Mephistopheles uses a form of science, which is what that is in the end. You know, fire will melt blood, so let's do that and job done. Just briefly on corpse medicine, I suppose, the subject which is the core of my other book, Mummies, Cannibals and Vampires. The spirits were very important. Blood was very important. People were drinking blood. They were drinking it fresh and hot, but they were also using skull, bone, flesh. And it was believed that these spirits were saturating the body. And in the end, the darkest secret, perhaps, of this whitewashed cannibalism of the European Christians was that not only was it civilized, if you like, industrial to some extent, proto-scientific, but it was profoundly religious, that they believed they were swallowing the power of the soul. And it got this precise. It got so precise down to the extent that when they talked about the best sort of corpse being a young red-headed man, dead of a violent death, aged about 24, preferably by hanging or drowning, they were saying this for very exact reasons. He had a particular type of blood. He's got red hair. His skin has a particular look to it. He's dead of violence, which means he died healthy. All his vitality was intact. He's died without any puncture of the body, which means that his blood is all there. Not only that, but he dies traumatically, because most of these specimens were, of course, execution victims, and he dies a traumatic death, which means that the stress of the death would condition his spirits, they believed, into the most potent form of all. Now, they have perhaps probably some idea of reality in this, because if you were to anatomize a corpse shortly after it died, and they would do it quickly when the weather was warm, as it often was, you would find that the blood was still liquid. Now, blood is still liquid for a surprisingly long time in people who've died a violent death. The trauma triggers an overproduction of a chemical called fibrinogen, and this keeps the blood liquid so that you can even transfuse blood from a corpse in some cases. Wow. So, yeah, a very kind of quasi-scientific...
well, to me, it rings true of them killing the children for adrenaquine, because that's the QAnon thing, is that they're killing them under trauma or under extreme stress to get the whatever QAnon says they're trying to get from them. So that's almost the exact same QAnon story again.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how you get these bizarre links between 2 points which you wouldn't imagine you could join, and yet if you do the research, you know, you see a kind of path between the two. Yeah, so the thing about these spirits means that people weren't that bothered always about the heart, about the brain. The soul was firing through the whole of the body and was there sparking through the blood, and was very much a process as well as a thing, if you like, a force as well as an entity.
Wow.
Now, a lot of things shocked me doing this research, but not least was the quite serious question put about with varying degrees of openness or deviousness, I suppose, in the time of Shakespeare, in the time of Donne, in the time of John Milton and Charles II. Did women really have souls? This was an important debate. This was an important debate. Now, there were two kind of ways to come at this question and to give the impression that women didn't have souls. One was that they claimed it wasn't really clear in Genesis that God breathed the soul into Eve as he does into Adam. Go and look at Genesis and see what you think. But the other angle was this, and it was probably as powerful because it was kind of quasi-scientific again. So heat was the important factor in the soul for a lot of biologists, medics, doctors, etc. And going back to Aristotle, you had this notion of the more heat you've got, the more ensouled you are. So you go from kind of the animal kingdom up through women, up through men, perhaps up through angels, I don't know. But you've got this rising curve of the more heat and the more soul. Now, as far as Aristotle was concerned, women were men that hadn't quite made it far enough in the womb. And this came down to the quite exact claim that the lack of sufficient heat in women meant they didn't push their genitals out properly like men did. And they didn't burn their hair up and go bald like men did. Nobody seemed to explain why women's breasts were more protuberant than men's, because that would sort of counter the heat theory, wouldn't it? But this was taken very seriously. So over and over again, I mean, metaphors of man is the soul, woman is the body, were as pervasive and as powerful as metaphors of evolution are for us now. And the precision again comes down to things like the woman is born on the left side of the womb, which is cooler, and the man on the right, which is hotter. And people in farms would tie up the left testicle of a bull if they wanted a male offspring, and vice versa if they wanted female.
I do that with some of my boyfriends too.
Okay, I have heard about this. I'm a bit worried about this persisting, actually.
And you know what? Hold that thought 1 second, Richard. I'm going to take a break and we'll be right back. This is fascinating. Sure. Okay, hang on. Hey, everybody. Paranormal Karen here doing an ad for myself because I literally cannot remember what I'm supposed to promo when I'm taping my podcast. But that's because all my guests are so interesting. Just leaving you a holiday note. You can purchase gift certificates for tarot readings, or you can purchase my tarot class as a gift at www.karenrontowski.com or www.paranormalkaren.com. Really, who still uses those W's? I don't know. Okay, so they would tie up the left testicle of a bull. So if they wanted a boy? Or if they
so the right testicle would be the operative hotter part, and then with a bit of luck your male offspring would get born on the right side of the womb. Obviously you had to have a woman involved or a cow involved, because you don't really get anything born otherwise, but yeah, that was the practice and the belief.
You know, it's very interesting because I know in yoga it's all about the breath. So I always think yoga and acupuncture. In fact, it's very funny because there's a sort of a related, this is my theory that I'm throwing out there too, is
sure.
When someone has surgery and they are cut open in acupuncture, their body can have too much wind in it, and it actually changes the personality. And the only reason I kind of throw that out there is because it's been a lot of people that have asked me that have had grandfathers or fathers or mothers that have had surgery and changed very desperately, like they were like, well, he's not as fun as he used to be. It's like it changed everything. And I always found that was very funny. In acupuncture, they're saying air got in, too much wind got in, which connects with breath to me. You know, it's funny. I just kind of found out who Lilith was in the Bible, Adam's first wife, which is very interesting because she was supposed to be the equal, right?
Well, this is it. You know, when you go back to the real stuff that got buried by the Catholic Church and also the Protestants eventually, it's so much more messy, isn't it? It's so much more messy, more interesting, actually.
Yes,
complicated. I mean, at one point, I think there were 4 different versions, 4 different regions in hell. You know, there were 4 different regions. But early on, there was no heaven and hell. There was just Sheol. If you're going to take your religion from the Jews, well, their afterlife was Sheol, this kind of dry, desiccating gloomy region. And obviously, if you've only got one region, you haven't got that opposition, you haven't got that contrast, which is so crucial to all the lurid notions of heaven and hell later on. Yeah.
Wow. And this also led to my favorite things are near-death experiences and past life. And this got you into some research about past lives, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying about breath and wind there is fascinating, because that comes into one of these extraordinary stories. So, yes, I rewrote the conclusion of the book because the original story, and the original story still stands largely, is that the soul was kind of chased out of the body by science, by anatomy. They're constantly looking for it. They're looking for this rete mirabile, the wonderful net of organs and veins, the organ of the soul. They're not finding it because, ironically, it was originally found by Galen in about 170, about sometime until 200 AD. Galen dissected only animals. He dissected only ungulates, cows, sheep, perhaps bulls, and they tend to have this wonderful net of veins and arteries, the organ of the soul, which they don't really need because they're not supposed to have souls. And so they couldn't find this thing. Time you get to Willis, the inventor of neuroscience, so very big on the brain, just decides not to talk about it, is a short way to put it, and just drops the spirits in their older form of the religious bond between body and soul. So that's the broad story. And then there's the question of, well, is that the end of the soul? Well, when I first wrote the book and researched the book, that was my belief. And I had a lot of reasons to believe in a soul or an afterlife. My father died when I was just 19, and good friends of mine died prematurely in succeeding years. But I've never been big on Christianity. And I suppose the problem I have with big monotheistic religions, we talk about the Buddha, and I think I love Buddhism, that it just, if you want to believe this, that's fine. If you want to, this is possible. Yeah, that's quite possible. This very open-minded religion, down to, I think, things like, do computers have consciousness? But religions that really believe that they know absolutely the truth, and that this is the absolute truth of past, present, future, the entire cosmos. Well, you've got a problem here, haven't you? Because there's too many religions that believe this. They can't all be right in the exact same way. And most of all, these powerful notions of absolute belief, absolute truth, absolute precision have been the source of appalling violence, haven't they? And still are, unfortunately, and are to some extent the source of, this very right-wing lunacy of Qanon as well. So I was pushed to consider the afterlife, I suppose, really by accident. I started researching poltergeists because I was coming up against them over and over again in The Real Vampires, and I thought, this is very odd. But
you mean the stories of them kept coming up when you were doing the vampires?
Yes, they did. They did. Okay. So what we would think of as a straight poltergeist, it's throwing people out of bed, it's beating them up, perhaps, it's very violent, it's throwing things around, it's making hammering noises with no source, it's throwing showers of stones through your windows, bombarding you day after day. No one knows where the damn stones are coming from. All this is standard poltergeist stuff. I know it sounds utterly crazy, but it is actually standard when you've seen hundreds of cases. And they would call this a vampire. They would say this is the fault of a vampire. So I thought, I better get my head around this poltergeist stuff. I'd never read anything about it. Funnily enough, just after my father died, I was told my first ever poltergeist story by an old lecturer. And I could never quite believe or disbelieve what he told me. It hung, this story, in a kind of limbo in my brain for over 20 years. When I started doing the research, and this is utterly crazy, my head hurt like nothing else had ever done. And yet it was consistently crazy. It wasn't the kind of stuff that people make up, because it was partly just so weird you couldn't make it up, but partly also it wasn't archetypal, it wasn't beautiful, it wasn't religious, it was mundane and silly some of the time. And I went out of the library. I've been reading all these poltergeist books in the British Library in London. Went to have lunch with a friend I've known for 7 years. Got talking. What are you doing? What are you doing? Have you ever come across poltergeists? Friend goes white, freezes up, goes silent for quite a while, and then says, "Can we go somewhere more private?" And spends quite a long time telling me about a poltergeist that's traumatized her family for 18 months. That has chased them from one house to another, which is exactly what poltergeists do, because they generate themselves around a person. And I then go back to Cardiff, where I live now, and I talked to another friend I've known for 12 years, and he says, "Yeah, I can tell you one." And this is his childhood. Now, the interesting point about what he told me, it wasn't particularly traumatic. Some of the time, his mother, who was Italian, had a knack for this, would just say, "Shut the hell up, get the hell out of here," and that would work. But the ghosts, the poltergeist they had, I, by this time, was slowly, painfully, and it was painful getting my head round poltergeists as a possibility that broke the laws of physics, yes, but were generated mundanely from a person suffering some type of trauma. This is very, very consistent for all of them. You probably know this. And I couldn't cope with ghosts. People started telling me about ghosts, who would politely listen but not really listen. And this friend of mine, known for 12 years, neither of them ever whispered this to me, by the way, before isolating and come across a poltergeist. Well, when he was about 3 years old, in this house where they have the hauntings, he would see a nice man at the top of the stairs with glasses, I think, wearing a football shirt. He would describe the nice man to his parents, and they would say, "Yes, that's Frank, who used to own the house. He died of cancer." And now he died, I believe, at such a time that the boy, as he then was, could never have seen him and known that he wore glasses, had a football shirt, etc. So here we've already got children telling you something that you want to listen to, actually, because it turns out to be true. But it was a long, long time after that conversation that I could really take ghosts seriously as well. And yeah, 8 years have gone by. All in all, I think I've put together almost all the pieces. I keep open-minded about this because I don't like believing you know the absolute truth about something so difficult and important. But I do have now a lot of answers. And one of them has come from cases I give at the end of the book, which are past life memories. The background to this is quite important because a character called Stevenson was the originator, really, of the research on this subject. And Stevenson, now you will look up, as we all do, let's be honest, on Wikipedia, Dr. Ian Stevenson, if you want to do so. And you will get, and I'm afraid you will get this throughout Wikipedia, a bunch of pseudo-skeptics have made it their mission to get hold of every possible paranormal case, incident, person connected with, and I'm afraid tell lies about them.
Yes.
And I'll explain this to you very precisely. You know this yourself, obviously, but in the case of
they have some sort of agenda there on Wikipedia. That's for sure.
I love Wikipedia in lots of ways, but this drives me nuts. And so Stevenson researched hundreds and hundreds of cases until he died in 2007. If you look up his Wikipedia entry, it's very deviously trashing of Stevenson, really. And the agenda you've got there, I'm not saying it's them that did it, but it's very coeval with the agenda of what used to be called CSICOP, Center for Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. I think it's now just CSI. They had a big reward of money if you could prove any paranormal phenomena. Now, one of the founder members of CSICOP in the old days was Carl Sagan, great scientist who died sadly very young. And Sagan was open-minded to 3 areas of the paranormal. He put this in writing in 96, and one of those areas was the subject of past life memories. You will not see Sagan's name in that entry for Stevenson, and you will not see Sagan very easily saying this anywhere on the internet. And the guy who carried on Stevenson's work, still does now, I think, Jim Tucker, has written more than one book on this subject, and it's from his research that I'm drawing here. Just to summarize briefly, children very young, 2 years old, 3 years old, terrified of water, trucks, various other things which they've got no reason to be terrified of, and so their brothers and sisters aren't frightened of, people aren't normally as children. And backstory, once they start recounting their past life memories, will tell you that they died by being hit by a truck, by being drowned, and so forth. Little boy in America, he was, I think, about 3 years old when he started having terrible nightmares and shouting, plane on fire, little man can't get out. Now, this boy was James Leininger, and his parents lived in, I'm just checking this because certain little details I don't always remember, Lafayette, Louisiana. And he began to tell them in explanation of these nightmares that he was a pilot in the Second World War, flying from a boat against the Japanese. His plane was shot into the water and he died, plane on fire and so forth. He said the boat was the Natoma. His plane was shot down at Iwo Jima, and he had a friend called Jack Larson. All of these details, very exact, were proved to be correct. Now, I could check the date of this for you, but I think we don't really need to worry about the internet, even if it's a factor, because 3-year-old kids are not really very adept on the internet and can't read. So, yeah, this is one of many cases where the children have got information that they really cannot get. You'll get this pseudo-skeptic stuff saying, oh, that the interviewers planted it in their heads, but this is nonsense. I mean, the kid told this to the parents before any interviewers came on the scene. Another case of a woman in America also who had a tragic time with one of her children, Kevin, and he suffered severe illnesses from a very young age, and he was constantly in a hospital. He had a kind of cancer, and he had an IV put into his neck. Eventually, he died, and long after this, the mother, Lisa, had another child, another boy, and this boy is by a different father, Patrick. The moment he was born, she sensed that he was Kevin. And all the grief that she'd been harboring as a mother would for
Everyone
all that
just
time
thought she was crazy. Yeah.
lifted. Well, all the grief lifted just the moment the boy was put into her arms. But it then got much more interesting and complicated than just this gut feeling. The boy limped for no reason at all, as his half-brother had done way back when he was alive and ill. And the boy remembered having surgery, as Kevin had done. There's a lot more detail, but most striking of all was that the boy had a birthmark on his neck, which corresponded exactly side of the neck and position to where the IV had been put into his brother. Now, if you don't believe a word of this, I do not blame you. I'm not sure I would, in quick paraphrase. But if you want to have an extraordinary read and learn something, do have a look at Tucker's book, which is called Return to Life. Now, another case of this comes from Britain, a little girl called Olivia, who presently, I think again about 3, starts telling her mother that she used to live, no, she was 2 in fact, so even younger, starts telling her mother that she lived in a past life in around 1787. And she recalled many exact details. Coins had got the king on them. They were bumpy on the edges and very flat. Her mother checked this out. Yeah, George III was on the coins. Yes, serrated edges, flatter than, say, your modern day £2 coin. Yeah. Well, these kids, a lot of the time, they'll drop these memories at a certain age, and they're not concerned about them anymore. They don't care. It doesn't bother them. They don't talk about them. Olivia's memories did cease, but they started up again when she was 4 because the family dog died. She was upset, obviously, and she wondered if the dog would come back. She wondered if the dog would come back as another dog. And she decided that it would, but she added that, I quote, "You spend a bit of time dead first, like a few weeks or a few months or something." Now, her mother was Catholic raised, but ended up not being very interested in religion, lapsed Catholic, and described herself as an agnostic atheist. Now, this originally Catholic woman from a religion that's got absolutely all the answers for you gets her most powerful, vivid, and I would say convincing glimpse of heaven from her 4-year-old daughter. And I quote here, I'll try and read this slowly because it's quite extraordinary. When her mother asked where she was after she died, Olivia said she didn't exist. She said that it was hard to explain, but that she went into thin air. She went up into the sky and broke up into bits of dust. The dust then floated all over the place. She said dying wasn't scary, and when she was dust, other people made friends with her. They were dust as well. Her mother asked if she was scared of dying now. Olivia said no, she wasn't scared, but the thought of dying did make her sad because she liked being on Earth. Olivia was extremely serious throughout the conversation. In fact, her mother said Olivia had such a serious look in her eyes that it made her uncomfortable. Now, children might make you uncomfortable by asking big questions that they rightly should ask. They don't usually make you uncomfortable for that reason, as far as I know. Yeah. So Olivia also, and you reminded me of this when we were talking about breath and this mysterious kind of role of breath that we really don't understand yet. And of course, it's very important with yoga and the shift from the left to the right brain. And yeah, all the early words for soul, all the early forces for soul, Atman in the Sanskrit, I think it is, and Pneuma in the Greek, Ruach or Nefesh in the Jewish from the supposed Old Testament. They mean breath, wind, air. Can't really paraphrase them, the nature of such words, isn't it? But they mean something like that. And here's Olivia explaining to her mother at one point how she died. All the air came out of here. Out of where? Olivia pointed to the middle of her body and said, here, and I died. I don't like talking about it.
Wow. That, it's funny, the other story about, this is the stuff that just, I can't get enough. The other story where the woman had the second child and was pretty convinced it was the first, that's beyond fascinating. And I know we really don't know, and I read a lot of things, but I never would think that's a fast reincarnation. That is a fast, and you almost never hear of it like that.
It's not that fast, actually. There's quite a gap between the children. I might be able to find the case and check it for you while we're talking, but it's a matter of years. It is actually a matter of years that it takes between the two births. I mean, what's fascinating to me, you probably know about this yourself, is the sense that, somebody just doesn't die and then get immediately reincarnated. As Olivia says, you stay dead for some time and you have a choice. And you certainly hear in these cases, don't you, of people coming back into a body and then kind of heart sinking, oh God, I'm back here again. I'm stuck with this again.
Right, when they have the near death. Yeah, and they're like, oh, I felt so much better over there. Yeah, it feels that is interesting, though. And I know this is probably, there's a bigger system than I can understand, but it almost feels like that first death was a mistake. Like if he's going to come back to the same mother twice, I
think a big rule, I can see what you mean, but I think a big rule for me in this very steep learning curve has been that the reality of spirits, of souls, which I think now, come down to something much more like consciousness, but it's come down to something that does seem to be able to survive, actually, the death of the body, it is much more messy. It's all much more messy than religion would like to have you believe. Yes. And unfortunately, it does seem to be easier to sell a clean, simple, stylized set of ideas to people than something that actually happened.
Yes, that there's no mistakes. There's a couple of jokes that I have written in this area that, near-death experience, that's someone made a mistake. Who's that guy? That's like showing up early for the party. That's not. It fascinates me that the system isn't that tight. But I'm kind of working on a bit now that makes me laugh about how everyone is so confident that their God is right, but in reality, you don't want to go to a church with an insecure God. You want to go where the guy's giving out answers. My best friend is an animal communicator, and we talk a lot to an animal acupuncturist. And when those two work together, it's almost unbelievable how my friend Sonia, the communicator, can get what's wrong with the dog, and the acupuncturist can tell what to do with it. But two things that are amazing is the acupuncturist will talk about how she says they will do autopsies on dogs that should have died years ago, where their innards are so riddled with cancer, or the dog is almost all cancer, but the soul, the spirit, the dog was like, I'm staying. Like there's no scientific, they can't figure it out. And the other thing is a lot of times like especially my friend, she had a dog named Dusty, and it sat on her lap like a child, like I've never seen another dog do. And she showed me pictures of it. Now she's got new dogs. They both sit the same way. And I kind of asked her about that, and she said, it's not Dusty, but Dusty trained them. Like Dusty was like, no, you got to sit like this.
Right.
Which is, it's all pretty fascinating. But, and I know, I don't, to me, I've had so many experiences with them. I believe whatever those two say, but it's just, I guess we won't know until we're dust to dust, huh?
A strange kind of dust. It sounds more like Philip Pullman's version, perhaps, doesn't it, in Olivia's words, than the biblical version. But the dog ghosts. I mean, many accounts of dog ghosts. People put their hand down, put the hand right through the dog that's actually a ghost. And a favourite of mine, I think, was a house in England where they had ghost dogs. They happened to have living dogs as well, and the two sets of dogs played together quite happily in the house.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Richard, fascinating. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I always enjoy talking to you. In fact, you and Peter Laws are both guys from England, and I always get a little nervous because you're both so smart and brilliant. I'm always like, I hope I can keep up. But thank you for coming on the show. I'm going to put a link to your Amazon to folks. You got to get Richard's books. They're just amazing. And is there any other place, Richard, you'd like people to find you or look for you?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, thanks, I remember, for being a great host, an ideal host, particularly for this subject, because it's not an easy one to talk about. But Twitter is a place where I've managed to, not quite say perfect, but live with the art of doing videos at 2 minutes, 16 seconds. I wish they'd let you make them longer. So I try and put little vignettes of my research out more or less every day. Sometimes it's politics, which is a pretty sadly hot topic in Britain at the moment. We're just looking at an absolutely miserable situation where we have a racist lying bigot in number 10. And
we don't know how that feels over here. We have no idea how that feels over here in America.
Well, you see, you don't quite, because the opposition is that you've got the most selfless, altruistic, tireless, honest, loved person who's now been thrown out of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. So we've got that other problem that's just happened this week. I talk about politics a bit, but mainly about strange subjects and research at Dr. Sugg on Twitter. And I do have a website, which is Dr. Sugg with the full spelling, Doctor. And you can read quite a bit more on there. I perhaps throw out just very briefly, it's not too cheeky. I am trying to pitch, as we were discussing yesterday, this article on QAnon. I think this subject really needs to be out there. Mm-hmm. It's still going to be important, unfortunately, after the election, whatever happens, as it is now. And anyone's got an outlet for this, is interested in this topic, I would love to get a longer version of that article out. So please do let me know if you could find a home for QAnon and the Blood Libel.
Yes, and that for anybody on Twitter or anything that you can make a suggestion to him, please do it through that. And you know what else, Richard? Get on Instagram.
I'm trying. The problem is the video scenario there is even shorter, so it drives me even more nuts.
Well, you can go Instagram TV, and then it pops up on your Instagram, and it says "Keep watching." You can click to keep watching.
I've got to get my head around it. I know. I must persevere. I will.
Well, wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Richard. And folks, all these links are going to be in the show notes, and we are on a Zoom timer, so I want to log off before and say thanks again to Richard off the air. So, Dr. Richard Sugg, look in the show notes. Go follow his Twitter. Check out his website. Look at his books on Amazon. They're fantastic, and it's great that book is no longer $100. I looked. I think it's $11.49, which is wonderful. So, all right, everybody. Thanks to Mike at Uno Rising Media. I hope our apocalypse is going better than I had hoped, and we'll see you all next week.